like to start first by saying thanks to Bill Grant and Gary Hansen, Carla Whitaker, for making this happen, and to the Technology Management Program, but most especially saying thanks to UCSB. I've spent all day here talking to a number of students and faculty, and I've just been blown away, incredibly impressed. You're an extraordinary group of people, and it's a real honor to be here talking to you. Before I get into my talk, I'd like to point out that you can find entrepreneurs anywhere. When I was flying out here yesterday morning, I ran into a friend who was getting his shoes shined at Logan Airport. And I thought, oh, I'll get mine shined too. So I got to talking to the shoe shine guy, who kept answering his cell phone, kept telling people who were working for the TSA, the federal agency, when they could report to work and in what building. And so I was talking to this guy, and I said, you're a real entrepreneur. I'm going out to UCSB to talk about entrepreneurship. And he said, well, you tell him I was homeless, and I got a small business loan, and I now have 20 people working for me, and I've got shoe shine stands all over the airport. So, you know, they're everywhere, and I think it's a wonderful thing for our society. Let me begin with the quick obligatory background slide. I've done bunches of things. You know, you get old enough and you've got a long resume, you can't help it. So I've done a bunch of these things, and I won't read this slide to you. Probably the most relevant ones here. One is that I'm Chief Operating Officer of Genomic Healthcare Strategies. We are in the personalized medicine space, and you'll hear more about our views on this later on. The other thing is that I'm co-director of MIT's Venture Mentoring Service. It's a volunteer activity, and I thoroughly enjoy it. So let's get on to substance. I have 5 themes here that I'll talk to you about tonight. And to those of you who are in biotech, you're going to find this sort of primitive. I'm not a biotech guy by training, but some of you who haven't lived in the healthcare space, or you're not biotech folks, may find it somewhat useful. I'd then like to talk a little bit about change theory. That is, what's the difference between a sort of evolutionary change in a market and a revolutionary change, a disruptive change? Then what's happening in healthcare? And you know, you put these 3 things together, and it's obvious that what I'm going to be saying is there are revolutionary changes, disruptive changes coming in healthcare. So that's what I'll talk about in this 4th part. And then I'll open the kimono in the last section and give you 10 great ideas. I lost my dad about a year ago. He was 91, terrific man. And one of the things that he would do on occasion is call me up and say, hey, Pete, I've got $1 million idea for you. And he'd give me this idea, and then he, you know, next time we talked, he said, well, what have you done with it? So I'll do the same thing to you all. So let's start with science, how health science is changing. And you'll see me quote Andrew von Eschenbach a bunch of times in this talk. He's the FDA commissioner, and I think he's a recovered cancer victim. So he knows medicine from both sides, and he is very much on board with where the new science is going and what an extraordinary change it's going to make. And he points out that, you know, for thousands of years, everything that we knew about why somebody was sick or what was wrong with them, we would tell with our 5 senses. You know, you'd feel something and it's hot, so you say, you know, your knee is hot, you've got a problem there. You'd smell a wound and it would smell bad, and you'd say, you've got gangrene. That's a real problem. If you want to get a little graphic about it, if a doctor or a barber, I guess they were then, suspected somebody had diabetes, you would taste the urine, and if it was sweet, they've got diabetes. So it was very much macroscopic. It was essentially outside the body. 100 years ago, after the microscope was invented, you could in fact see the cells that made up tumors, or you could see a bacterium that was causing something. Couldn't see viruses then, but later on you could. And so we went from macroscopic to microscopic medicine. And but remember, during this time we were still only dealing with sick people, not well people. 10 years ago, with the research that was done that led to the Human Genome Project, there were really fundamental new abilities to look not only at entities, but at the mechanisms of action, the process that happened. And an important thing to point out here is this part here, that it was not, for the first time, we were able to look not only at diseases, but at the person susceptible to a disease. That means we could look at people who were pre-symptomatic and know what they were going to have. Remarkable transformation, nothing like it in the history of medicine, absolutely new. And this whole area is called molecular medicine. And to quote, I'll let you read this, I won't read it to you. But I've heard Eschenbach give this speech. He gives it from time to time. And I think he's absolutely right. Medicine in the future, healthcare is going to look no more like healthcare today than a caterpillar looks like a butterfly. It's radical and profound. And it's interesting. I'll come back to this point. But when he gives this talk to people in medicine, people who have grown up in the system, people who are traditional healthcare providers, they hear it as, we'll be able to treat patients better. They don't hear it as, we're going to help people who are well better. And I'll come back to that. So molecular medicine increases the knowledge of the mechanism of action. It helps understand how the disease and the therapy fit together, what you're doing when you give a therapy to somebody with a disease. And it also gives rise to a hugely increased number of biomarkers. If anyone asks me what a biomarker is, I will quote my colleague in GHS and say, a biomarker is anything the FDA says it is. But let's not spend a lot of time on definitions. You can look at cells. You can have a biomarker that's an image. You can have a biomarker that's molecular. You can look at genomic things. You can look at proteomic things. You can look at proteins. You can look at a whole variety of things, but there's this clump of biomarkers that are really quite new. More importantly is what they can do. They can do these things. Again, I won't read this list. You all can read. And even more importantly is what they let you do. This is the key stuff. You can identify a specific disease. No longer do you have breast cancer, you have a particular type of breast cancer. And if you overexpress the HER2 protein, then there's a kind of treatment that may be useful for you. Nobody knew that before. You can target a therapy to a particular disease. You can also, in some cases, guess or at least predict the extent to which you're likely to have a recurrence of that disease. Now, these two last two parts look the same, but they're different. I'll be talking about warfarin later, which is a blood thinner that you take after a stroke. Some of you in Susan Block's class have heard this several times today. You'll hear it again. My apologies. But you can determine an initial dosage in some cases based on someone's genetic makeup or through other kinds of biomarkers. Or you can look at the effectiveness, at the appropriateness of the dosage, depending on a whole bunch of other things, like the person's lifestyle, what they ate last night, how much exercise they do, a whole bunch of things. So we really have brand new tools that we didn't have before. Let me give you an example. Last November, GHS helped put on a conference at Harvard, and one of the speakers was Mara Aspinall, who is the CEO, I think, of Genzyme Genetics, a really talented woman. And I've swiped the content of her slide for this one, and you can see the progression. 70 years ago, it was diseases of the blood. Then they could differentiate it into its leukemia or its lymphoma. Then they broke it down further, and today, there are 89 different varieties of blood cancers. And if you look down the right-hand side here, during that time, the 5-year survival rate went from essentially 0 to almost 70%. That's progress, and it's going to continue. So let me shift topics for a minute and talk about change theory. And there are a lot of people who've written about change theory, but the person whose work I like is Professor Clay Christensen at Harvard Business School. And he's written a bunch of books. I've got, at the end, there's a slide if people want a reading list. But he's written some good stuff, and he's good on change theory. He says there are two kinds of innovations. There's a sustaining innovation. And let me give you an example of that. Vista, which has just been announced by Microsoft. It's their new operating system. They're an incumbent. It's just an evolutionary kind of change, and they're going to win. They're going to sell lots of it. We will all be using Vista in 2 years, and except for some who use Linux. But they're going to have huge revenues from it. That's a sustaining innovation. It's like going from 2 blades on your razor blade to 3 blades on your razor blade, and then to 5 because Schick took 4. The incumbents win in those situations. That's not very interesting. What's more interesting is disruptive innovations. And he says there are 2 kinds of those. One is it's low end, it's straightforward. Something that used to cost you $100, you can now buy for $1. Or is that product going to disrupt the market? Of course, it makes a big difference. And again, that's terrific. We all welcome it when it happens. But the one I really focus on is when you create a new market, and I think that's key in healthcare. Now, let's talk about new markets. Christensen says disruptive new markets occur when you have one of 2 conditions or both. You've got existing products or offerings limit the number of potential customers. I have a physical coming up, my annual physical, in 2 weeks. I had to get that appointment. I thought in November, gee, I should have a physical. It's been a while. So it's 3 months later that I'm going to get this physical. I think that qualifies as a market limitation. The other piece is that Christensen says is when your consumption has to take place in inconvenient centralized locations or where it's basically a real pain to consume what you want to consume. And I ask you, does this sound like our current healthcare situation? I would submit the answer is Yes. Okay, let's talk about healthcare. Some observations. Healthcare costs are very high, around 14% of GNP. That means out of every $7 that changes hands in our economy, $1 goes to healthcare. That's, completely, as far as I know, out of line with anybody else in the world. The system is complicated. It has the difficulty that it's sort of evolved over time, and people keep trying to put patches on it. I remember when a thing called diagnostic research groups, diagnostic reimbursement groups, DRGs, I can't remember what the initials stand for, came into being. It was an effort to limit the cost of healthcare, and they said, appendix out, a day and a half in the hospital. You have a baby, 2 days in the hospital. They just said, you had this is how much time we'll reimburse in a hospital. And we've moved on to managed care, lots of changes, and they all sort of get stacked on one another. If you were designing the healthcare system from scratch, you probably wouldn't wind up with what we have today. It's important to note that there aren't any villains in this picture. It isn't as though there are a bunch of evil people trying to make this happen. It's the doctors work hard for their patients, the administrators try to do well, the payers try to be rational. They've got limited resources and they try to put them in the right places, but it doesn't work real well. So the healthcare system is too expensive. You've got lots of different payers. You can pay for some things yourself if you want boutique medicine. I have a friend who pays his doc $4,000 once a year, and essentially in exchange he gets the doctor's cell phone number, so he can see him whenever he wants, and gets some billing on top of that. So you can pay for it yourself. If you're on Medicare pays for it. You have to get CMS to give you a reimbursement code if you're trying to work in this space. There are insurance companies, there are pharmacy benefit managers, there are a whole variety of people. I've heard people from European countries say, you people in the US do it all wrong. A single payer works just fine. It doesn't work all that well. The healthcare we provide is still pretty good, but it's a clumsy system. The healthcare system anywhere in the world has a focus on illness, on sick patients, on people who have symptoms, not on people who are well. I will come back to that. There's a lot of regulation. You get various estimates. One doc I know says it's 8 minutes. Another one says 16 minutes. At the Harvard conference, I heard 12 minutes a patient, but it's a kind of vanishingly small amount of time you get with your primary care physician. Record keeping ain't great. I know, when you get older, your medical record gets to be like that. You guys are probably like that. But most of it's on paper. They can pull up an X-ray or something like that, but a lot of it's on paper, much more of it than should be. And the user interface of the healthcare system is lousy. The layers you have to get through to get the information you need if you go to your doctor, the way you get an appointment, all those things are not the way you design them if you wanted to market the product to somebody and get them excited about it. So you add to this situation molecular medicine. If you look at most doctors in practice today, they did not study a huge amount of genetics when they were in medical school. And if you look at doctors today, 50% of them were in the bottom half of their class. So you add to that, there are 70 million baby boomers who have disposable income. They're getting old. They're worried. They want to stay healthy. They're mostly pretty healthy. We've got a consumer society where people are used to buying things over the net or from lots of different people who provide stuff. You look at the internet, where there's a fire hose of information available about all the new research. I know that I had a slightly weird reading on some test in that long list of blood tests you get when you get a physical. And my doc said, come in and talk to me about it. I did my web research and came in and said, well, this is what I've found. And she said, you know more about this than I do. Then again, she only had 5 minutes before or 12 minutes to study up on it. So, you know, there's a huge amount of information out there for those of us who want to look for it. And another really important factor here is that if you look at the companies that are in the healthcare system, you're looking at mostly big companies, the ones that are nationwide. You're looking at big companies. They have probably 2 or 3 or 4 major competitors. Their offerings are all almost exactly alike. They're in a commodity business. You know, they're competing on price. They don't compete particularly on service. So they're under constant pressure to lower their costs, to lower their prices. What happens, the other thing that happens is that at the same time they're trying to lower their costs, all sorts of investigators are saying your costs are too high. So what they do is getting much more transparent. They can't make money in places they used to make money because people are putting a spotlight on them. And they're public companies with a stock price that they have to maintain, and their management is saying, what the devil are we going to do to please the analysts, to say we've got something new, we're going to have higher margins, we're going to have higher revenues, we're going to have some business we're going into that's different from our current business where we're a commodity, where we can make more money, where we can grow. So this is a real problem for these companies. I'm not talking about the ones like, pharma does have this problem, but I'm not talking about pharma so much as companies that participate in the healthcare system, but they're not necessarily selling drugs. I've enjoyed talking to all of you today and seem to have used up my voice. So, will the healthcare system respond to all this new stuff? Let me just give you a quote from Christensen. Basically, he says it better than other people I've seen. He says, look, you look at a company and you've got resources, you've got processes, and you've got values of the people in the company. So you look at, say, your managed care provider. Their resources are a bunch of doctors and administrators who know how to get reimbursed for the stuff they do. You look at their processes, and they're all about treating sick people. You look at their values, and they're about saving lives and making people well and comfortable. Those are all great. But is that the kind of organization that's going to do something new and different and entrepreneurial? Very likely not. It's just a different business, not the business they're in. Let me give you an example of the way the healthcare system, people who have grown up in the healthcare system respond. At a conference in November, my colleague was running a panel. I was in the audience, and his panel spent all the time saying, healthcare is overloaded, the information systems don't work, everything is terrible. And at the same time, they were saying, there's all this wonderful new molecular medicine. And I asked this question. Since the healthcare system is overloaded and can't respond, and we're in a society full of entrepreneurs and a capitalist society where people want to do new things, and you've got demanding consumers, who's going to fill the gap? And you see the answer I got. And that was pretty much the extent of the answer. So the folks in who are providing healthcare to sick people now are great, but they don't really get it about where this new science can take us. And I'll be telling you where that is in just a minute. So we have an overloaded system. We have strong pull from consumers. And there are lots of different ways to reach consumers that the healthcare system as it currently exists not only hasn't thought about, but if you suggest these to them, they say, that's appalling. You can't control quality. You can't you can't let people make their own decisions about healthcare. We're the learned intermediaries. We're the people who make their decisions for them because we know what's best. There are going to be a whole lot of people who say, I don't think so. And those are going to be some interesting new markets with some real entrepreneurial opportunities. So let me talk a little bit. This was all introduction. Thank you for sitting through it. Let me get to the meat of this. We see some big changes coming. And this is in healthcare broadly defined, not just treating sick people, but treating well people, helping them live better lives, avoid disease, and so on. And I'm going to give you 10 examples of entrepreneurial opportunities in this space. I thought of one a couple of weeks ago that is so good, I'm not going to tell you about it. We're probably going to do it. But you get 0 through 91%. And some of these are models that are already in existence. Some I can't talk about with specifics because we're under non-disclosures. But this is going to be a huge space, and there's room enough for all of us in it because this space is going to be huge. So, big changes. This is a slide I want to spend some time on. A statement that we make, that I make, is that diagnostics are going to drive everything. Let me explain that, because that's a really key feature of this thing. We're all used to the big pharma companies which have blockbuster drugs. They spend $700–800 million, they say, to develop these drugs, and then they have multi-billion-dollar markets afterwards, and they need that to get their investment back. Well, that's going to change, because with these new biomarkers, with molecular medicine, you're going to be able to tell who can take, for example, probably not yet, but soon, who can take Vioxx and who can't, who's going to have heart problems if they take Vioxx. It'll probably come back on the market, but it won't be a blockbuster. It'll be a very focused drug. So drugs in general, therapies in general, will be focused on the people for whom diagnostics show they will work and not be toxic. Huge change. What's that going to do? What that's going to do, pharma's been like that. Pharma will come down in value and in revenue. Maybe not so much in revenue, because if you can take some drugs which have gone off the market and target them to people for whom they work and for whom they're not toxic, we'll see some dead drugs come back onto the market. But diagnostics, let me tell you a little bit about diagnostics. In the past, diagnostics were really the stepchild of the healthcare industry. That is, in order to get, look, does everybody know what a reimbursement code is? Let me assume not. Some of you don't. If you do something and you're a doc, the government sets the amount of reimbursement they'll pay for that. And if you're in private practice, you can charge your patients whatever you want. But if they have insurance, insurance says, we're not going to pay more than the reimbursement value for that. So the reimbursement amounts are very important. And for diagnostics, it's been basically, diagnostics have been so simple. You pee in a cup, and they test it and say, you've got diabetes or you don't. They take a blood sample and say, you've got anemia or you don't, or you've got, I don't know, think of a disease or not. They swab your throat and say, you've got strep or you don't. No, they've been basically pretty simple tests, and the way they've been reimbursed is a little bit for the materials and a little bit for the technician time. No money to cover the development, so that reimbursements for diagnostics have been tiny. And in fact, in, what was it, 94, I think, there was legislation that in essence said you can't change the reimbursement for diagnostics for a long time. Maybe it was 2004. It was some while back, and that is beginning to change. There is a company that has a product called Oncotype DX, which differentiates among different kinds of breast cancer and talks about the likely recurrence of breast cancer. Those folks have said, forget your CPT codes for reimbursing. This test has clinical utility. This test can tell you, can have huge effects both on economics and on saving patients' lives. The price for this test is $3,600 rather than $80 you get for putting something on a slide and looking at it under a microscope. Thanks. So these folks, everybody said impossible. You can't do that. They've spent a lot of time and effort and money, and the result is that they've gotten some people to reimburse them at close to that level. That is a completely new thing in the diagnostics biz. Why is that important? Because it fits with molecular medicine, and it is going to have a huge impact on the investment in diagnostic companies at just the right time, because now these diagnostics will drive everything. Another important thing about diagnostics is that the new molecular diagnostics will work on people who are well. This is radical. Looking at somebody and saying, you're going to have a heart attack, you're going to have osteoarthritis, you're going to have this, that's never happened before. And in some cases, there's some awful diseases where you can do that test, you can say you're going to have it, and that's all you know. You can't do anything about it because it's a deadly disease. But in some cases, there are preventive things you can do, and that is going to make a huge difference. You look at warning labels on drugs. You get an antibiotic because you've got a sinus infection. You look at the label that comes with it, and it says you could have this side effect, this could happen, this could happen. Eventually, these diagnostics are going to say, you can make that label very short. Somebody will do a test and say, take this sort of preparation of this stuff with the active ingredient and these other things. Radical change, completely different from what we see now. And the fact is that using diagnostics in these ways, using molecular medicine in these ways, is the real way that we're going to save money in healthcare. You're not going to do it by limiting somebody's time to 12 minutes. You don't do it by having the physician's assistant take my blood pressure. It's because you're going to say, instead of giving this $100,000 course of cancer treatment to all 20 people who have this cancer, we're going to use the diagnostic, and it turns out it's only going to work in 2 of them. And these other folks, maybe there are different things you can use, and there'll still be expensive courses of treatment, but the advantage will be that people get the right course of treatment, so you cure the disease quicker, and that's the way you're going to save cost. You're also going to save cost if you prevent a disease from ever happening. You're also going to save cost if you get the dosage right the first time. I'll come back to that. So, sorry to spend all that time, but diagnostics are absolutely crucial to where this space is going. Second thing, consumers are going to get involved. I was speaking at a conference a couple of years ago, and there'd been a bunch of medical types talking about things. And I said, I came toward the end, and I said, look, everybody who's been talking about personalized health, personalized medicine, is talking about patients. I'm talking about consumers. It's the same people. You folks keep thinking about them as patients. They are consumers, and they're going to buy from people other than you. Some of them actually thought I was right. So that's going to be a big difference. The healthcare system doesn't do wellness. If you look at what gets paid for right now under insurance or other kinds of reimbursement, people get, doctors, the healthcare system gets reimbursed for treating illness. I go to my doctor and I say, my tummy's growing a little bit, I'd like to lose 20 pounds. Doc, what do I do? She says, don't eat as much as you do. Thanks. The system doesn't treat wellness. And if I say, what's my chance of having a heart attack? She says, I don't know, we'll take your blood pressure, or we did that, and we'll take a blood sample. But there are tests out there that the healthcare system doesn't use particularly that can focus on those things. Regulation's going to change. Everybody who's in the system now says you can't do some of these new things you're talking about because of the fact that the regulations are different, or will prevent that. If there's 70 million baby boomers who want something, regulations are going to change. These folks vote. They also contribute. So I think, look at the most recent State of the Union address. For the first time I can remember, President Bush talked about healthcare reform in useful ways. And the tax code is going to change. I believe within maybe 5 years, you're going to be able to write off some money you spend on your own health care, and that'll include prevention, I think. So in this situation, there are going to be new entrants into the field, and that's what I'm going to come to. There are going to be a wide variety of business models. They will do things in very different ways. It's going to be chaotic for a while, and there are going to be lots of opportunities. So let me get to the entrepreneurial possibilities. As I say here are a few I've thought of, and clearly after the day I've spent with you all, you folks are all way smart, and you're going to come up with lots I haven't even dreamed of. In my experience, entrepreneurs generally don't want to create Me Too businesses. They want to produce a solution that customers want. That's how they succeed. They spend a lot of time understanding their markets. If you ask a healthcare administrator or an MD, tell me about the healthcare market, tell me about what the people you serve want, you're probably not going to get the kind of answer that you could write a business plan around, because they're constrained by the R, the P, and the V, the resources, the whatever P stands for, and the values, the processes and the values in their situation. They don't think about markets. Entrepreneurs can think about markets. And I think entrepreneurs also anticipate where markets are going, anticipate needs, and they're there to fill them in as they grow. And they look for markets that are growing rapidly. There's the old expression, a rising tide lifts all boats. With what's happening in medicine, you can lift an ocean liner. There's going to be huge change. So, I'm almost there. Some venture possibilities. There are a wide variety of possibilities here. I see I'm talking too long, so I will just jump forward. By the way, there are profit and nonprofit ventures here, possibilities. So let me give you an example of where you might think about starting a company. Interleukin Genetics, which is on the American Stock Exchange, was started by a very smart dentist and geneticist named Korngold. I've met him, very smart guy, nice guy. And when he started it, the company was started to focus on predicting inflammatory gum disease. There is a term, clinical utility, that is, will it be used in the healthcare system? Does it do any medical good? This particular thing that he had no clinical utility. You go to the dentist twice a year, the dentist opens your mouth, looks in, you've got gum disease or you don't. If you do, he treats it. If you don't, she doesn't. So the company raised money, went public, and the stock plummeted. But then it got redirected to look at inflammatory heart disease, and they're about 65% owned now by the parent company of Amway. Amway has a direct channel to the consumer. So interleukin has the diagnostic. You have a predilection toward inflammatory heart disease. Amway sells antioxidants. Put these together, and you've got a market. They have this division called Neutralite. So you've got a classic razor and razor blade model, and this can happen in lots of other fields. So there's one for you. Warfarin. Warfarin is, I mentioned before, it's a blood thinner. If you have a stroke, they give you warfarin. The range at which you metabolize it from person to person varies about 20%. I may metabolize it 20 times faster than you do. But the therapeutic range is much narrower than that. So if you have too large a dose, then you'll have internal bleeding. If you have too small a dose, you may have another clot in your brain and you die. So the adverse effects can be just monstrous. And there are 20,000 people a year, 20,000 people a month who are virgin warfarin dosers. They get their first dose of warfarin. And usually it's an immensely time-consuming and sometimes hospitalizing kind of process because they give you a little bit and they sort of titrate you. There is a DNA test which explains about 60 to 70%. This stuff is published. It's out there in the literature, which says whether you're going to be a high, medium, or low metabolizer. But that only covers 60 to 70%. I know of a metabolic test, I was mentioning it in one of the classes where I was today, that will tell you, will add to it, did you drink grapefruit juice last night? So you've changed the way you metabolize this stuff. It makes a big impact. Are you exhausted? Did you drink 8 glasses of wine last night? These things all affect how you metabolize this stuff because they mess around with your liver, and your liver is where you metabolize it. So there's a real opportunity to add the last 20 or 30% to the 60 or 70% and with a metabolic test. So I've been talking about things which involve a fair amount of science. Here's one where you can hire scientists to work for you. I'm not sure everybody knows what a roll-up is in the sort of corporate term. As I say here, it's not a sandwich. It's aggregating a bunch of intellectual property or a bunch of companies in a space where there's a lot of diversity. So there's no reason why some of you couldn't put together a company, get some funding, and look for and focus it in new and interesting ways. Little kids, some significant number of them wheeze when they breathe, and of that number, something like maybe 20%, 30% are going to have asthma, and the rest aren't. If you focus on something like kid wheezing and aggregate intellectual property around that, you'd have a real company. There are all sorts of different focuses you could have. There are chronic diseases that require monitoring. And some of the monitoring could be done much better with biomarkers in molecular medicine than it's done now. And there are a whole bunch of baby boomer related issues. If somebody solves the male pattern baldness problem, I'll be right there in line to buy their stuff. But what's going to happen in this space? There are going to be a whole bunch of claims. There are going to be lots of people. I've mentioned a company that that you're supposed to send, I think it was I think it was a urine sample. You sent to this company in Woburn, Mass, and they said, this was pregnant women who would do this. They say, we'll tell you whether you're going to have a boy or a girl. It was completely bogus. They made a bunch of money. They got outed, and they're out of business. But there's going to be a lot of bad stuff on the web that's going to go direct to consumer. Why not be the people who vet these tests, who check them out, be your own consumer's report for this space? The first 2 or 3 people in there are going to do very well, and you'll be doing good as well. Here's an opportunity around which you could build a consulting company. I mentioned Oncotype DX and their $3,500 or $3,600 reimbursement. Most of the people in diagnostic companies, bless their hearts, are scientists. They look great in their white lab coats. They, with all due respect to them, and they do good work, they wouldn't know marketing if it bit them in the face, as a friend of mine says. Marketing is going to be a terribly important part. Branding is going to be a terribly important part of where the diagnostics business goes. The reason the folks who make Oncotype DX have done so well is they spent a significant amount of money on science and more money on marketing and positioning their product to get good reimbursement. Things are going to open up in diagnostics reimbursement. If you all become experts, you'll never starve, because that's going to be a very desirable field. If you go on to, so diagnostics are going to be big. As it says here, my colleague Keith claims that everybody in every university has a pet biomarker. You don't see anybody in a biology department who doesn't have their own favorite that they've developed. These may or may not have clinical utility. They may or may not be useful. And the field is going to get so noisy that most people aren't going to be able to. Am I running too long? Oh, okay. Most people aren't going to be able to differentiate among them or find them. I think there's a huge opportunity here for going around, gathering the information from universities, from technology licensing offices, aggregating that, and working with pharma companies who need companion diagnostics for their therapies, and other people who are looking for diagnostics to help them figure out where to find them in a particular space. So it's basically an arbitrage business. Here's a business you could either do as a company or solo. There are going to be all sorts of issues. Genetic non-discrimination, with these genetic tests and with the genetic information possibly revealed, employers or others can discriminate against people. That is fundamentally wrong. But it's going to be a huge issue, and there are going to be lots of court cases around it. There is consumer privacy. Whose property is information about your own DNA, and how do you deal with somebody who's revealed it? Medical records. There are going to be all sorts of standards and rules. Right now, if you think of your medical record, that's something at your primary care provider's place. You don't think of it as being your property. It's your property. And pretty soon we will see a transfer. You will allow your healthcare provider to have certain access to your medical record, but not to other parts of it. And that may tie into genetic non-discrimination. Certainly they don't necessarily need to know about your entire genome. So there's going to be lots of legal action, lots of legislation around that. If you want to build a consulting business and be an expert witness in this field, you will never starve. Maybe you want to start a venture fund. Most of the venture funds I know of who invest in biotech are still, or in this general space, invest in medical devices. They look at something and say, oh, that's about to get licensed by Merck. Or they say, here's a promising small biotech company, but they haven't thought about the direct-to-consumer market. That's going to be significant. And you could start a you could start a wellness, molecular medicine-focused fund, and since you would be relatively alone, you can really cherry-pick the deals. And you can look at nutraceuticals, direct-to-consumer, targeted diagnostics, even at some information things. A real opportunity. Another kind of expertise you might want to be relates a little bit to something I said before. There aren't very many people who both know regulation, what kinds of claims you can make. You know, if you are selling nutraceuticals, or if you are selling a diagnostic or a therapy that hasn't been through the FDA, you're very limited in the claims you can make for the efficacy of this stuff. So if you want to learn, you know, it's like having, say, a PhD and an MBA. If you want to sort of have one foot on each side, learn the regulatory stuff and keep up with it, and at the same time, really understand marketing to customers. You know, usually you have one or the other, but not both. If you can learn both of these things, you've got, I think, a very interesting consulting business. I think most of you have heard of the Segway, the sort of one-person scooter with the gyroscopes in it. That was developed by a guy named Dean Kamen, who runs a thing called Deca Labs up in New Hampshire. I've been up to see him, and one of the things we talked about was he'd love to get going on this if I find him money. A home diagnostic device. Basically, it's connected to the internet, it's connected to your primary healthcare provider. You go down to your drugstore and say, I've got a sore throat. They give you the sore throat kit. You buy it, you swab your throat, you rub it on the kit, you poke the kit in the home diagnostic device, it analyzes it, sends it off to your doctor. Your doctor says, you don't have strep, you do have strep, here's your prescription for penicillin or whatever. There are lots of opportunities in this space, and it really is coming. And I know some of you are in the platform business with microfluidics and so on. That's going to be a big part of this market. Almost there. I am there. Here are 10 ideas which just begin to scratch the surface. I think there are lots of good goals in here. You help people, you reduce healthcare costs, you create jobs in companies, and you make the healthcare system better. I'm absolutely in love with this space and hope you'll find it interesting.